starting it off, like with Liberty Gold CEO Cal Everett, that announcement on expanding the footprint of the Black Pine operation, or the plan of operations. How transformational? What's the impact on your news flow and what you're trying to do by getting that permit right now in your back pocket?
Joe, that the expanded plan of operations took about a year and a half to go through Forest Services and the Bureau of Land Management. And when we received it, we never had any questions come in from any environmental groups or anything, because the project's ideally situated. And it's already been disturbed, and there's, as I've discussed before, there's no negatives on the project. That zone was never drilled before because the previous operator in the mine wouldn't drill the sandstone skin to see the system underneath of it, because they were only limited by budgets to drill to a depth of 300 feet. We now drill that system down to 1,200 feet. And that 4.6 kilometers is separated by 2 oxide discoveries on the east side, and it's also separated by 7 oxide discoveries on the west side. And the extreme projected edge of the starter pit for the main deposit that we're doing the resource estimate on now butts right up against it. And there's about 2.5 square kilometers of ground undrilled that will extend, hopefully, that system right over to the other discoveries to the south and east. So it's extremely material because it adds a massive amount of blue sky potential for the company when it's already been historically drill verified all along the edges that the system is there.
Just to follow up on that, I mean, we have a new presidential administration right now in the States, obviously. Do you think that 1.5 years it took to get this permit under the Trump administration would have been any slower or quicker under the new one, or did it matter at all?
No, it's exact same. It takes about, to get a notice of intent to disturb 5 acres takes approximately 30 days. They're easy, it's boilerplate, it's part of the rules. The same permitting mandate under the Biden government is what we deal with right now. It was never adjusted by the Trump government. The only thing that they changed was they made an environmental impact study permit as part of your permit application to speed up the process. They wanted to limit it to 100 pages of scientific work instead of 250, 280 pages. So nothing's really changed that way. If we're in Nevada, Utah, Idaho, doesn't make any difference. We're dealing with federal agencies, either the Bureau of Land Management or Forest Services. It takes the same for every plan of operations we've ever done. Idaho's a little bit different because we're dealing with Forest Services and there's no forest there on the property. And the people we deal with there are really, really professional. They help you right through the process, as does the BLM. And the Forest Services people are ex-exploration geologists, so they know exactly what we need, and they walk us through the process to make sure we do everything in a proper sequence.
Okay, thanks for that, Cal. Moving over to Alaska, also in the States, but with COVID-19 and how long it's been taking labs to get the assays out, how has that impacted your exploration on your first phase of drilling, which you had a shorter season just because between listing and getting the rigs out there? How did that impact how you target in coming into 2021 and what data you have?
Yeah, last year that was a significant issue for us, starting late in the season. Exploration picked up markedly in Alaska, partly because the first half of the season was lost to COVID, but the gold price meant a lot more people doing a lot more exploration. So we were very slow in our lab turnaround last year. We ended up shipping samples to Whitehorse in the Yukon to speed up the processing time. But that problem actually becomes an advantage for us. If we're underway putting our first samples in the lab in April, we'll be well ahead of most explorers. You'll note, I note that ALS in particular have sped up their gold turnaround quite significantly. It's down to about 21 days. So our problem last year should be much less of a problem this year because we'll be underway before anyone else in Alaska.
Right, but I mean, in terms of having to push assays through or fast track them, you don't think that'll be an issue in your 2021 season?
I think it might be an issue for a number of companies. I think the fact that we have so many targets will help us cycle our exploration. So we've got the set programs that we need to drill to follow up the open intersections at SH1, Aquila and Apollo. But there's a whole series of other targets that we didn't talk about, either old workings or previously drilled or previously sampled areas. And we can put 3 or 4 holes into each of those and move to the next target, and then get the results back and then circle back to those. But so because we're in such a target-rich environment, it's not going to impact us like it might some other smaller projects.
Okay, and Mexico is starting up as well, and so you will have both those news flows happening at the same time.
Yeah, there'll be a slight offset. So we're underway, we announced this morning on our Mexican project. So we'll have news for that for the next 2 months, but then we'll mobilize to Alaska during that period. So we've had the 2020 results for the last 6 weeks. We'll have Mexico news flow for the next 8 weeks, and then we'll be back to UNGA news flow for the rest of the year. So that'll remain quite consistent, which was a deliberate strategy.
Okay. And for John from Loncor, nobody can deny the prospectivity of the Congo or the DR Congo, and obviously your results, your resource right now at Adumbi, and that prove that out, as well as Barrick doing the joint venture on the majority of your other projects. But how do you get over trying to explain the where you're working to some investors that might have a bit of trepidation about assets in that area? Cool.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I think this is where we're really fortunate. As I say, there's a checkered history in the DRC. That's not something we can change. We can just look forward. And having Kibali sitting there with Barrick managing. I mean, to put what they're doing into perspective, the last 2 years, they've been either at the top of their expectations or beyond expectations with production. And their costs, as I said, have been phenomenal. And they've been there now, previously under Randgold. Randgold started it all off, but they've been mining there, for 6, 7 years. Moving underground, one of the most mechanized operations. So that's 220 Ks away from us. So that sort of proves that things can not only be done, but can be done very well in a cost-effective fashion. And that's close to us. So outside of that, we really just have to point to the progress that is happening in the country. There's no doubt. And many's the time, because we don't have to say anything with Rob Freeland telling everybody about how wonderful the project is. But it is, it's a fact that things are happening in that country ahead of expectations with that copper JV that we've got with the Chinese. So things are really moving along at a pace in some of these projects, and that just allows us to point to them. I mean, we're at an early stage. We can only do what we want to do as quickly as we want to do, and touch wood, everything's going well with us as well. Our drill rigs came in, we're drilling. Yeah, we've got 2 drill rigs there, and everything seems to be going to plan as far as we're concerned. So there's nothing really stopping us from moving ahead. So upwards and onwards for us.
When Barrick, or even Newmont talk about tier 1 assets, they define them by, I believe, like 500,000 ounces a year over 10 years, bottom half of the cost profile. But Kibali is actually a joint venture between Barrick and Anglo. So they're not getting 100% of that production. So when they look at tier 1 assets in the DRC, do they require a joint venture with another company, or are they willing to take 100% of something that's smaller, but on a attributable basis, it might even be more than what they're getting at a Kibali?
I suppose the strict answer to that is you got to pose Barrick that question. But they from our perspective, looking at what we have to offer, we certainly are very interested. And I think you must also bear in mind too that whilst Barrick are quite strict on that tier 1 definition, they also have a tier 2 definition, which is for a slightly lower parameters, but on a higher IRR type return, or low, especially, and also low cost return. So what their thoughts are on joint ventures, etc. As I say, that's really a question for them. But from our point of view, we just know that we've got a project which mirrors Kibali in the early days. It's much smaller as it stands, but we're drilling aggressively. We hope to get 3.5 million ounces at a Dumby down to 600 meters. We'll look to put some deeper holes further down, and we'll just continue to do what we do. And if we get to larger amounts, then I think everybody will be happy as far as shareholders. And one thing I'm not sure I pointed out, but we have decisions to make in the next 3 to 6 months. We're going to come out with 400,000 ounces of high-grade resource in that area. That gives us 2.9 million ounces in that area of open pit. So I think it's robust enough that we should go ahead and do a PEA just on the pit, because there is also a school of thought that suggests we should put the ounces below. We've got 1 million ounces that we're drilling out below the pit as well, and incorporate that. But really, given margins of $1,000 an ounce as we have currently, and those sort of ounces in the, you're talking about, you just have to do the maths, 3 million times 1,000. Yeah, you've got to discount it for many things. So it's not actually 3 million ounces will go through the pit, through the plant. But my feeling about this is we've got some very exciting decisions to make and some very exciting news that will far outweigh our current 80 million Canadian market cap over the next 3 to 6 months. So exciting times ahead.
Great. And just finally, I mean, COVID-19, had that really impacted your asset in Africa with respect to, just productivity or, lab turnarounds or anything like that?
Yeah, you're seeing a little bit of it, for example, at the borders, where protocols will become a little more complicated at the borders, just the transaction of material, essentially, perhaps a little bit more paperwork. And obviously at the, we're getting ours tested in Tanzania, Rwanda, and there's slightly more protocol there. But we're not looking at major increases in turnaround time. And Barrick is the same with the drilling they're doing on the joint venture. I mean, stuff's been flown out, getting there, processing pretty quickly and coming back still pretty quick. There's perhaps maybe a week extra on the turnaround. It's nothing significant for us.
Okay, all right, thank you. Just moving on with that theme about tier 1 assets or tier 2, just moving on to Joe Hamilton with Unigold, because you're in the Dominican Republic. Obviously the big asset there is another tier 1 asset, which is Pueblo Viejo, which is a joint venture that Barrick has with Newmont. So Barrick, is investing, I believe it's about $1.5 billion in expanding the facility and lengthening the mine life in the Dominican Republic. How does that impact what you do with respect to exploration, building a resource? Is it easier to sell the idea of the Dominican Republic, knowing that, people know Pueblo Viejo, even though you might not have the same type of mineralization?
Well, Joe, Pueblo Viejo is, it is a world-class deposit. It's arguably the number 2 or number 3 mine that Barrick operates globally in terms of cash flow, resources, reserves, production, just about any metric you want to use. So it is a tier 1 asset. The Dominican Republic has tier 1 assets. That's what attracted Unigold to the DR in the first place. Barrick's been a really good social and corporate partner to the government since they arrived, and certainly under the stewardship of Mark Bristow, they've been doing a much better job of, let's say, being good corporate citizens. They've made advanced payments to the government, advanced tax payments during COVID. When the government was having difficulty getting foreign currency, Barrick stepped up and sort of paid them in advance royalty payments and tax payments. So mining has become a big part in the Dominican Republic, and I think the government's aware of that. Barrick and Newmont are expanding operations at Pueblo Viejo and adding another 6 or 8 years of mine life and trying to move, another 6 to 7 million ounces from resources into reserves of that operation through the expansion. That's been underway for a year now, and as of next year, it should be complete and they should be able to move ahead. Barrick has also just late last year started to move out to do exploration in the country. They've picked up a number of concessions of the Torrio Formation, which is the acid volcanic rocks in that island arc. So they've started to move out and look at exploration in the country as well to add more resources. It certainly helps junior companies, but in reality, Unigold seems to be, one of a very small number of companies doing exploration in the DR. It's sometimes you feel like you're a bit of a voice in the wilderness. Unlike some of the area plays that we've seen recently in British Columbia or in the Yukon or in northern Quebec, where you've got 15 or 20 companies doing work and putting out news almost weekly. What we're doing in the Dominican Republic, we've been doing very slowly and systematically, and we've been moving our projects and our deposits up the value chain in the process. And I think that's, we'll continue to do that. Certainly Barrick being a country helps us immensely. They're certainly educating the population in how modern mining can be environmentally friendly and also be good corporate citizens in the process. So, we're not foreign mining companies operating in other jurisdictions should behave that way, with a social license to operate and in a corporately social responsible manner. And I think Barrick is certainly setting the example for all companies. So I think it's a boon to be in the Dominican Republic while they are there and while they intend to stay and continue to expand their operations.
Just a final question for you, because you have geologically, not peculiar, because a lot of decent deposits have more than one event. You've got two different mineralizing events that impact Candelones, and then also probably generate your varied scenarios in terms of prospects, your open pit heap leach, your open pit potential milling, or your underground. Do you find that hard to communicate to investors, that you've got three different things that you might be looking at based on the complicated, overprinting geology there?
I would say, Joe, that 3 or 4 years ago, it was difficult to communicate because we were unsure on how we were going to proceed. Now that we understand that the high-grade mineralization, which are these epithermal veins, which seem to overprint older disseminated mineralization, those hang together quite nicely, and then we can wireframe them and we can put mineable shapes around them. They're subvertical, so they lend themselves very nicely to underground mining. Whereas the larger resource, which is at least 2 million ounces now that we know of, and we'll be updating that in the next 4 or 5 weeks, that is sort of an open pit model. So what I intend to do, rather than trying to explain all things and be all things to investors, is in the second quarter of this year, we'll make a decision on how we want to proceed, either underground or open pit, with the sulfide resource. Basically the trade-off studies, they're quite simple. The open pit resource will probably be 25 to 50,000 tons per day. It'll be a fairly high capital project, but it'll generate 300,000 ounces of gold a year, but at very high capital, and perhaps at a relatively high cash cost because of the amount of material that needs to be moved and the lower grade. Whereas the underground mine will be much lower capital, probably lower production, somewhere around 150 to 200,000 ounces of gold per year, at a 7-gram head grade, but at a much lower capital, and perhaps because of the thicknesses we're seeing and because of the subvertical nature, perhaps at lower mining costs, which means all in better profitability for that type of an underground mine. So rather than get into long discussions with people about what the best way to approach it is, we'll just do the work, and we'll do the work in the second quarter of this year, at which point we will then turn the engineers loose on designing that mine as we move forward and going through the feasibility work that needs to be done. We've certainly done enough drilling. We've got over 130,000 meters of drilling into this deposit at this point. We're prepared to now move it into that production scenario.
Great. Thanks very much, Joe. And to Tim, new president of Mirasol, but as you've said, you've been there for a long time and you've seen it progress. The project, a prospect generator model is, not a greatly loved model at this point when financing risk is much lower. That might change, mind you. And you were saying something about it being more of a hybrid model. So what's that hybrid model, and how do you generate more excitement for Mirasol going forward?
Yeah, Joe, you hit that on the head. You know, the prospect generator model is either boom or bust. It's either in fashion or out of fashion. So it's a tough one. When we refer to the hybrid model, we're still out there generating new projects. The joint venture model works very well. You get these projects into third-party hands. They're financing the exploration and moving the project forward. But the hybrid model means that we're more open these days to take on some of those projects in-house and move them forward with Mirasol funds, you know, as far as we see is logical for Mirasol. We obviously wouldn't take on, you know, a high altitude copper porphyry project, which is, you know, extremely expensive to move forward, seasonal and that kind of stuff, nor would we want to go into these high sulfidation systems as Mirasol, very expensive. You know, up in the Andes, you're drilling for $700-800 a meter, but certainly in projects like we've done in Inca Gold, which is low, accessible all year, not really complicated. Santa Cruz is that way as well. You know, these are easier to drill, less expensive. They're typically high grade, which is an advantage to a junior company. So that's the hybrid, a balance between, you know, bringing in partners for joint venture and selecting the other projects that we want to move forward in-house. So I think that gives us what happens when you're strictly in the joint venture model. You kind of lose control of your destiny. It's a great model and it works very well, but you do lose control of your destiny. So us taking on our own projects, we have control and we can move them forward as see fit, and we can kind of control information flow and how the project advances. So that's what I mean when we refer to the hybrid model.
Right. You know, obviously COVID-19, the pandemic, you know, hit Latin America very hard and potentially hit, you know, Mirasol very hard because, you know, a lot of the projects that you're talking about now were projects that, you know, were supposed to be drilled and supposed to be worked on last year, but, you know, because of the pandemic, it impacted, you know, your season.
Certainly.
So is this year you're thinking is going to be that much more different as you move through these projects?
Yeah, I think what COVID has done to us, it's delayed us a little bit. It hasn't really stopped us from doing what we want to do, but it has put in some delays. It's probably increased some of the cost in some of the projects, but we're certainly learned how to work within the COVID environment. You know, we used to flow freely between Chile and Argentina with our exploration crews. We always did have dedicated crews in each country, but these days that's a little tough. So we're working strictly with local crews, trying to bring in people from as close to the project as possible, because there's all kinds of protocols and procedures, lots of hoops to jump through to be able to do what you want to do. But we're certainly able to do what we want to do. It's a different environment completely. Maybe surprising to you, but Argentina actually has stricter protocols than Chile. And, you know, the provinces, particularly Santa Cruz, is very strict, but very open to wanting to exploration to move forward, but under their protocols. So, you know, we're gonna move forward with everything that we wanted to do on our self-funded projects, and our partners as well are moving things forward as well as possible. One of the examples was Newcrest. They've been delayed, but they're going to come back after August, which will be October, the drill season down here, and get things going again. So delays, but not halted.
Okay, just on a side, you know, Santa Cruz is obviously a Patagonian province in the southern part of Argentina, and in Chubut, where I used to live and where I did work, you know, the Navidad project, they're talking about potentially, you know, cutting that out and potentially making an area where you could permit an open pit. Is that news, the positive news flow from that, and any of that impact Mirasol in terms of people looking at Argentina or anything like that? You know, does that impact you guys?
No, I think because we're strictly in Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz has always been pro mining. Argentina on a national level, you know, they're trying to make mining one of the pillars of the economy. So both where we work provincially and on the national level, you know, the message going outside is come into Argentina. We're pro mining. We want to get this going. There's certain isolated provinces, and Chubut is a good one to use as an example, that struggle to get that going. There was, about a month ago, there was supposed to be a vote on whether they move forward or not. That fell to the wayside, so they're having trouble bringing that to the forefront. It's a complicated province, but very prospective, as you well know. So hopefully they get it together and people can start coming into Chubut as well.
Okay. Well, I mean, for the last few minutes or 9 minutes that we have, I'd just like to run through each company and just give people an idea of what catalysts they could look forward to in the next, let's say, 3 to 9 months coming from each company. And so I'll start with Cal with Liberty Gold.
Thanks, Joe. Once we get our last drill results in from the lab, from last year, and we're looking at, from our purposes, a 2.5 month delay now, up to 3 months to get those results back. People don't really understand that the effect of COVID has affected the assay labs, and that slowed down the numbers that have come back from the labs, which slows down your maiden resource estimate, and it slows everything down. But as things are sequencing out right now, we're looking at final drill results from last year out by the end of this month. Initiation of the maiden resource to come out about 2 months later, with a senior Carlin specialist engineering firm and all their Carlin people doing the maiden resource, and that will be audited by another Carlin specialist firm out of Toronto as part of the process, so we get the numbers to match our geological model correctly. As soon as that comes out, we announce a PEA, and that will take approximately 4 months. And after the PEA is done, we should have completed the infill drilling from the maiden resource to convert that from inferred to indicated ounces on the maiden pit area. And then we'll go directly into a pre-feasibility study before the end of the year. In the middle of the year, you'll get the next phase of metallurgy, but you're also going to have the equivalence of 5 to 7 drills operating in approximately 3 to 4 weeks. Drilling between 56,000 meters up to 70,000 meters of drilling. And all those ounces that are discovered from that, because we're just stepping out from existing discoveries, won't be in the PEA because we're not going to get that put together. So that would have to be an updated resource estimate by the end of the year. At the same time, we're looking at initiating drilling again on the Gold Strike deposit we have in Southwest Utah. At $1,500 gold on the PEA, that had an after-tax IRR of 41.5% with a 1.8 year payback. CapEx to build that $113.2 million based on a 1,700 hole database. We're going to go back in with a single drill for 7 months, and we're going to be back at work on the second oxide gold deposit and take that to an economic study to convert again inferred to indicated ounces, which is what we need to announce pre-fees on both Black Pine and Idaho and Gold Strike in Utah at the exact same time. I don't think many companies are doing that. And then meanwhile, I'll work on hopefully monetizing our last asset in Turkey.
All right. Well, sounds like a lot of things going on. Okay, Charles, for Heliostar, I know you're itching to get back drilling soon.
Sorry, unmuted. Sorry, unmuted. We'll be similarly aggressive. We've got the work program in Mexico that started this week, and we'll have news from that from the next 2 months. And then we'll return up to Unga at the end of March. And so we'll be drilling under our high-grade resource, expanding the Aquila discovery under the old Apollo mine where they blocked out the ore, and then extending and expanding the old Centennial non-compliant resource. So we'll have very strong news flow with 3 drill rigs from 4 very high probability targets at Unga.
Okay. And moving on to John with Loncor, what do you expect to provide the market over the next 3 to 12 months?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing is to tell more and more investors about what we're doing, because the last 6 to 12 months has been just getting our name out there and nobody knew us. That's the first thing. And then after that, the next 6 months is a Dumby and a Dumby and a Dumby. So, and if that proves up not the way we wanted to, we've got the 3 months, we've got the 400,000 ounces of resource in the pit, taking it to around 2.9, doing a PEA on the back of that with the sort of margins of Kibali of $1,000 an ounce. And then parallel with that, continue drilling underground and look to add up to 1 million ounces underground. Anything else on top of that is really cream and at the other areas, or Barrick JV and all those things. If we just do that on a dumby, as I say, the PEA, the work that I've been doing internally, you can easily do it yourself too. Just multiply the figures together, you get big figures. So that should be enough, the PEA coming out to transform our share price.
Great, thank you, John. And then just moving to Joe Hamilton with Unigold. You've got quite a bit on your development timeline coming up.
Well, that's right, Joe. The things that investors can look forward to in the short term are the PFS on the oxide portion of the deposit, which I think will be able to show, the NPV on that project alone will probably be in excess of our current market cap. Shortly thereafter, or in conjunction with that, we'll put out the resource estimate in the sulfides. There were 2 million ounces in the sulfide resource in inferred in 2013 when we put out the last resource estimate. This resource estimate, I think, will upgrade that. It will also move a substantial portion into measured and indicated. But as part of that resource estimate as well, we're going to break out the high grade portion of the deposit. We're going to estimate that individually. Think of it as sort of the hole in the donut. And then we'll also do an estimate on the lower grade mineralization that's there, so that we can then in the second quarter go through our trade-off studies between open pit and underground, so we can communicate to the market on how we intend to move forward with the sulfide portion. But quite frankly, the PFS on the oxide portion, I expect will show an NPV larger than our current market cap, which means investors get the sulfide project for free at this point in time. After that, I'm expecting the second half of this year that we should have results from exploration. Some of the exploration targets I think I put forward in the presentation are, let's say, very compelling. And I'd like to think that we can find another Candelones, another 2 to 3 million ounces in that exploration program, and show the potential for that by the end of the year. So that's what we've got coming up. I think it's a transformative year for Unigold. And I think it's one where finally the market will start to recognize the work we've been doing over the last 10 years.
Great, thank you. And then finally to Tim with Mirasol Resources with your catalysts in Argentina and Chile.
Yes, Joe. Actually, I had a slide dedicated just to that in my presentation. So obviously the big catalyst here is getting that 15,000 meters done across those 7 projects during the next 10 months. As far as news flow, it's going to be constant now going forward, because we've got Virginia. We've had news flow out of Virginia. Hopefully towards the end of the year we can update that resource estimate at Virginia in conjunction with Silver Sands, who are moving that project forward. And of course, Inca Gold has just got underway. We'll start to have news flow coming out of there, shortly. Sasha Marcelina as well is close to startup. Really exciting targets there. So we hopefully will get some good results coming out. And then towards the latter part of the year, the big projects coming back online with Newcrest and First Quantum, the big high sulfidation drilling programs and the copper porphyry. So, right to the end of the year, from now till the end of the year, lots of news flow, lots of activity, and kind of non-stop from here on in.
Great. All right. I think we'll wrap it up there. I thank you to all you gentlemen for being on time and presenting opportunities in these during these times with your assets all over the world. So I appreciate it, and thank you viewers for watching, and those that have come on the recordings once this thing is recording it out. And that's it for me, Joe Mazumdar of Exploration Insights from the Metal Investor Forum, a March virtual edition. Thank you very much.